Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Let's begin today's session of comprehensive news analysis with the first article that again takes us back to the Lokayukta related controversy in the state of Kerala. This is a topic that we did discuss earlier as well. In short, the Kerala government recently introduced an ordinance to cut down on the powers of the state's Lokayukta. The reason being that the Lokayukta in Kerala had a lot of special powers which the other Lokayukts did not have. For instance, if the Lokayukta of Kerala during his or her inquiry found out that any public officer is indulging in corruption, the Lokayukta had the power to remove that person from his public office. That even included the ministers and even the chief minister. The government of Kerala thought that this power is unconstitutional because as per the constitution, the power to remove the chief minister or the ministers in the government lies with the governor only and not with the state Lokayukta. That is why the government introduced this ordinance that was recently given the assent by the Kerala governor. The other reason that it is a part of controversy is that the Lokayukta in Kerala was actually investigating a matter which involved the state's chief minister as well. And that is why the Kerala government was in a hurry to introduce this ordinance and get it passed from the governor. The author here, who is a former Secretary General of the Lok Sabha, being the former IAS officer himself, says that there is no doubt that the Lokayukta Act in Kerala was unconstitutional. Not just the section where it gives the power to Lokayukta to remove the ministers, but other sections of the Act also need to be looked into once again. After the governor gave assent to this ordinance, as expected, the Lokayukta of the state of Kerala has expressed its resentment, hoping that the assembly would not pass a bill to turn the ordinance into a permanent law. The author here says that the history of Lokpal and Lokayukta in India goes back to the first Administrative Reforms Commission in 1966, headed by Morarji Desai. However, despite multiple attempts being made at the parliament, the Lokpal bill could only be passed in 2013 after the big Anna Hazare-led agitation in Delhi and other parts of the country. The author here says that if you look at how the Lokpal Act has been passed in the parliament, definition of Lokpal and its functions will give you an idea about why exactly is there a problem with the Kerala's Lokayukta. For example, the author says that the 2013 Lokpal Act of Parliament says that an act to provide for the establishment of a body of Lokpal for the union and Lokayukta for the state to inquire into allegations of corruptions against certain public functionaries. In other words, the Lokpal at the center or the Lokayukta at the state has to be an investigative body. Now, there are two different bodies that you have to understand here. We follow the concept of separation of powers, meaning that a body that conducts investigations has to be a different body altogether, and a body that decides whether the investigation is conclusive or not, or whether action has to be taken or not, is different. For instance, the police or the CBI investigate the matter, then they take it to the court, and the court decides whether a person is guilty or not. In Kerala, on the other hand, what the law had done was it had given the power of investigation to the Lokayukta and also gave the power to the Lokayukta to hold the person guilty and remove him from his or her position. That is what the problem is. When the original Lokpal Act made the Lokpal and the Lokayukta as just an investigative body, how can the government of Kerala give the power to Lokayukta to remove the person and be a judge instead? At the center level also, the Lokpal team is headed by the Chief Justice of India or a retired Supreme Court judge, and at least half of the Lokpal members are judges. Now, the Lokpal at the center level has been made in such a way that there are judicial members also, and there are other members also who don't come from the judiciary. But even then, even at the center level, the Lokpal does not have the power to remove a public functionary from his or her position. The Lokpal has an inquiry wing and it has a prosecution wing. The prosecution wing will have to prove the findings of the inquiry wing in the court so that the action can be taken finally. But Lokpal alone, just because its inquiry wing found someone guilty, cannot remove him or her from the position. As I said, once the investigation wing of the Lokpal conducts the inquiry, the prosecution wing of the Lokpal will file the case in the special court and will try to prove the charges. Again, the Lokpal at the center level does not become a judge and does not give the order for the removal. The Lokpal at the center level has been given jurisdiction over the top functionaries of the country, including the Prime Minister in certain cases, Central government ministers, members of parliament, group A, B, C, D officials, and the officials of the central government as well. But even then, the Lokpal does not have the power to ask the president to remove these people from the office. The matter will have to go to a special court where the Lokpal's prosecution wing will have to prove the case in order for the action to be taken. Now, the 2013 Act, when it was passed at the Parliament, said that if a state does not have a Lokayukt already, then they would have to appoint a Lokayukt within 1 year. But some states in India already had a Lokayukt law even before the Lokpal law was passed. Maharashtra was the first one in 1971. Kerala also established the office of the Lokayukt in 1999. And that is why most states in India where we have the Lokayukt have different kinds of powers and functions for the Lokayukt. Because the central government law just gave a broad framework about establishing the office of the Lokayukt. But the intricate details, the powers, the functions of Lokayukt differ from state to state. In Kerala specifically, the Kerala government law, if you look at section 14, which is the center of controversy, this section says if Lokayukt is satisfied on the complaint against a public servant being substantiated, means if the Lokayukt is satisfied that yes, there is a case of corruption, then the Lokayukt can make sure that the person does not continue to hold the post, means he can himself remove the person. In fact, in the past, there has been a minister from the Kerala government that has been removed by the Lokayukt of Kerala. No other state has a similar provision for their Lokayukt. This provision is unconstitutional due to various reasons. We just discussed the concept of separation of powers, which is being violated here. The Constitution under Article 164 clearly says that the CM or the ministers hold their office during the pleasure of the governor and not the pleasure of the Lokayukt. Chief Minister cannot be asked to resign until he enjoys a majority in the lower house of the state. And this provision of this act, section 14, goes against this article in the Constitution. Now, for now, at least this section 14 of the act has been removed, but only through an ordinance. As you know, as the law works, once the assembly is back into the session, within 6 weeks, they would have to pass a law to convert the ordinance into a permanent law. The author here says that even if you ignore section 14, there are many other parts of the law which need to be looked into again. For instance, in the law, the Kerala government has said that the functionaries of political parties would also be considered as public offices. So, for example, a spokesperson of a political party, a general secretary of a political party, who is not even an MLA, would also be considered as a public office. Thus, they would also be under the power of the Lokayukt. There is no such provision in central government law under which the Lokayukt can investigate matters of people who are holding political offices outside the government. But the Kerala government has still given them this power, which again needs to be looked into. And that is why the author says that not just section 14 of the act, the other parts of the act also have to be looked into very carefully once the assembly meets again in the state of Kerala. Now, just to share a bit of detail, the specific changes that the Kerala government is making in section 14 are this. Earlier, the act said where the competent authority is the governor, the government of Kerala or the chief minister, he or it shall accept the declaration. Means whatever recommendation the Lokayukt gives, that is about removing a minister or the chief minister, it has to be accepted. The word shall here means that it is compulsory to accept whatever the Lokayukt recommends. On the other hand, now the proposed amendment is that may either accept or reject the declaration. Means now whatever the Lokayukt suggests will not be binding on the government. The second change is when declaration so made is accepted. However, that has been changed to if declaration is accepted. The difference is when you use the word when, it is understood that the recommendation will be accepted no matter what. The only point of discussion is when exactly would the recommendation be accepted. But when you use the word if, that means the declaration may or may not be accepted by the state government. These are the two major changes that the ordinance has made in the Lokayukt Act of the state of Kerala. Now, the history of Lokpal, although it has been mentioned briefly in the article, is not completely mentioned. If you look at the history of Lokpal, not just in India but around the world, there are many other countries that have a similar kind of an office. It is said that the first country to have such a kind of an office of ombudsman. Ombudsman is any official that investigates corruption charges. It started with Sweden in 1809. Then there were many other countries that had a similar kind of office, especially after the Second World War, when countries started to face the problem of corruption. In 1967, there was a committee set up in UK called the White Committee, which gave its report in 1961, after which Britain also appointed this office of the Ombudsman in their country. In India, the first time that it was proposed was by the Law Minister Ashok Kumar Sen in the early 1960s. However, the word Lokpal and Lokayukta, that is the Indian version of Ombudsman, were coined by Dr. L.M. Singhvi. I'll give you another interesting fact about this. Dr. L.M. Singhvi was a Congress minister. His son, that is Abhishek Manu Singhvi, is also a Congress member, a big leader who is a famous Supreme Court lawyer also. When Anna Hazare agitation was going on, Abhishek Manu Singhvi, that is L.M. Singhvi's son, was one of those people who were against appointing a Lokpal. So the son of the person who actually gave the term Lokpal was the one who was opposed to the appointment of the Lokpal at the time of the Anna Hazare agitation. In 1966, when the first ARC, Administrative Reforms Commission, was appointed under Moraji Desai, they also suggested appointing a Lokpal to look into complaints against public functionaries. Various governments tried to introduce the bill at various points of time, but it just did not pass both the houses of the parliament. In 1968, for the first time, the Lokpal bill was introduced and passed in the Lok Sabha, but it could not be passed in the Rajya Sabha. In 2002, also, a commission to review the working of the constitution, headed by Justice M. N. Venkatachalya, recommended appointing the Lokpal, but it was not taken seriously. Even the second ARC repeated the same recommendation, but again it was ignored until the big agitation led by Anna Hazare and the team of India Against Corruption was held in Delhi, and after that, the 2013 Lokpal and the Lokayukta Act was passed. As I said, the act said that wherever there is a Lokayukt already at the state, that is fine. But if you don't have a Lokayukt, then within a period of 1 year, the states must appoint Lokayukt. And that is why different states have Lokayukt being appointed at different points of time with different powers being given to them. The next article that we have focuses on US President Joe Biden's Indo-Pacific strategy. This is an article written by an established author in the field of international relations, Mr. Brahma Chalini, who has written many award-winning books, especially in the field of international politics. The theme of this article is that Joe Biden, the US president, is stuck between two big issues: whether he should focus on Indo-Pacific region or he should focus on Russia's aggression towards Ukraine. The author is making a point that despite making a lot of promises that the new presidency will be different from the Trump presidency, that US will be more assertive and helpful towards its allies, but the reality is that it is not being translated on the ground. In fact, the strategy of Russia and China to deviate America's attention from Indo-Pacific is turning out to be extremely successful. Joe Biden is the third successive US president that has committed to America having a primary focus on Indo-Pacific region. But the current president has not taken any concrete steps in this regard. In fact, he is increasingly being distracted from the Indo-Pacific region by what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. And this plays into the hands of China especially, which is appreciating the fact that US is not saying anything against China and its activities and focusing all its attention towards Russia and its plans to invade Ukraine. Ever since Joe Biden became the US president, it was expected that he will release his Indo-Pacific strategy document, which is considered a very important part of US president's strategy towards the Indo-Pacific. However, this document faced many delays just because the US president could not focus on the region. And very recently, we had this Indo-Pacific strategy document released by the US government. But it does not contain any specific details, and in fact looks like a copy-paste version of what the last president's strategy document was, with a very few minor changes. That proves the fact that the mind of the US administration right now is focused only on Russia, and all its talks of focusing on Indo-Pacific are not really turning true on the ground. The document makes a mention of FOIP, that is Free and Open Indo-Pacific, which was a phrase coined by Shinzo Abe, that is the ex-leader of Japan. But this phrase was always a part of Donald Trump's Indo-Pacific strategy. The same phrase has been used by Joe Biden's strategy document and says that US is committed to ensuring free and open Indo-Pacific region. The only change in the document is that Quad has been mentioned multiple times, and it is mentioned that the US will focus on a much larger issues now, including global health security, climate change, emerging technologies, supply chain cooperation, etc. Which, as per the author, is not a good sign, because spreading yourself too thin and focusing on hundreds of issues means that you are not focusing on the most important challenge in your hand, that is the expansionist role that the Chinese government is playing in this region. Interestingly, while Biden has been extremely critical of Russia and Vladimir Putin and even called Vladimir Putin a killer in an interview, he has not said any words against what China has been doing in this region. His response towards China's activities with respect to India and India's border has been very moderate, and his response does not match with his pre poll commitment of ensuring that China is not expanding illegally. In fact, the Indo Pacific strategy document also seems to be very warm towards China. The document says that China seeks to become the world's most influential power, and our allies in the region bear much of the cost of China's harmful behavior. But it does not talk about taking any action against China. It says that the US will seek to manage competition from China responsibly and work with the Chinese government. PRC here stands for People's Republic of China, which is the official name of the country. Since taking office, as I said, Joe Biden has treated China with much more warmth as compared to Russia. He called Vladimir Putin a killer while not taking any word against China's aggression. Thus, for all the talks of US presidents reducing their military presence in Europe and focusing more on Indo-Pacific and Indo-Pacific region, it has not translated on the ground. That is also one of the reasons that China also is quiet about what is happening with respect to Ukraine and Russia. They are comfortable in that position where US is focusing more on Russia rather than China. Some experts speaking from the Russian side have also blamed the US for what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. Many are pointing out that it was a US NATO military exercise near Russia's Black Sea coast that actually forced Moscow to take this aggressive position against Ukraine, because Russia has time and again been demanding that we don't want expansion of NATO and its allies towards the Russian border. And this started with American forces taking up this exercise. Thus, it is important for Joe Biden to get his act together and make sure that rather than focusing on Russia, Ukraine, he should bring back his focus on what his biggest challenge actually is, that is the expansion of China. Now, I'm sure all of you have been following what is happening with respect to Russia and Ukraine. Yesterday, the Russian army officially entered some parts of Ukraine, although the Russian president called them peacemakers and not someone who is actually occupying the area of Ukraine. They were in fact two areas of Ukraine which have now declared independence from Ukraine. These two areas specifically have a lot of Russian speaking population. If you have some time today, I suggest you to watch one thing. So what happened yesterday was Russian President Vladimir Putin was having a meeting with his top military officials and the government officials, and this was televised all over the world. There are YouTube clippings also. So yesterday, Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, was asking his head of intelligence, what do you think about these two regions declaring their independence from Ukraine? Do you support it or not? Now, this head of intelligence of Russian government means a very powerful person, almost equivalent of Ajit Doval in Russia. He was almost shivering while talking to Vladimir Putin. He just could not talk straight. His words were fumbling, and Vladimir Putin in front of the camera was almost scolding him, telling him, why can't you talk straight? I'm not understanding what you want to speak. Speak clearly, speak straight to the point. And he was so scared and shivering just because he was in front of his president, Vladimir Putin. So just try and understand the kind of fear that Vladimir Putin has in the minds of people who are working in his own government. Now, the US Indo-Pacific strategy document that the article makes mention of was released recently by the US administration. Let's look at some of the important points of that document. The document focuses on capacity building to deal with the challenges in the region, which specifically come from China. It also mentions India as being a major defense partner with the US and talks about India's role as a net security provider in the region, as in providing security to the smaller island nations in the region. The document makes a mention that the US wants to have an Indo-Pacific region that is free, open, connected, prosperous, and resilient. The US says that this can be achieved using regional groupings where US is a part, including Quad, ASEAN, the European Union, NATO, and AUKUS, which is a security alliance between Australia, UK, and the US. It also says that we will make sure that there is integrated deterrence for any country that is looking to harm any of the US allies in the region. About India specifically, the document says that India's role in Quad is an important element of US-India relationship, and US will continue to support India's rise and regional leadership. It also says that India is a driving force towards Quad. However, it does not seriously criticize China for its action on the LAC. It just says that China's actions along the LAC, that is line of actual control, has had a galvanizing impact on India-US alignment and has only brought the two countries closer. But in reality, no strict words have been taken against China for whatever they have been doing at borders with India. The next article that we have here again takes us back to the issue of online gaming, which we discussed earlier. The issue is in the news because recently the Karnataka High Court struck down the decision of the Karnataka government to ban online gaming in the state. The Karnataka High Court had said that it is unconstitutional to prohibit and criminalize playing online games in the state. Interestingly, in the past few months, other high courts also in Madras and Kerala have struck down similar provisions from their respective state governments. Now, the interesting part is over the years, the Supreme Court and many other high courts have said that online games such as rummy, fantasy sports, bridge, chess, horse racing, etc. will be allowed because they are considered as game of skills. If you remember, we had discussed this the last time that whenever the court has to decide a question whether a particular game should be allowed or not, is it betting or not, the court usually asks the question whether or not is it a game of skills or is it a game of chance. The logic is if it is a game of chance that anyone can win and it does not require any skill, then it will not be allowed. But if it is a game of skills, that is, it depends on player to player, what do you choose, how do you make your team, there are many stats that you have to consider. In that case, it will be allowed. So if a particular online game is a game of skills, the court will allow it, otherwise it will not. Supreme Court in the past has allowed the game of skills and considered fantasy sports, online rummy, etc. as a game of skills only. But even then, many southern states specifically have been trying to ban online games which are played for stakes. Stakes means when money or any other kind of a commodity is involved there. The author here says that rather than banning it completely, the state governments must make sure that this industry is flourishing in their state and is regulated properly. With proper regulation, even the state government would earn a handsome revenue and it would allow more employment opportunities for people who are working in this field. In fact, the central government also in the union budget had said that an animation, visual effect, gaming and comics promotion task force will be set up. So on one hand, the central government is trying to propagate this particular sector and make it bigger and involve more experts. On the other hand, the state governments are trying to ban it, which is going contrary to each other's policy. This sector has also received a lot of foreign investment. In the last 5 years, online gaming sector has received $1.7 billion in venture capital and in private equity from investors around the world. Now, the last time when we discussed this article, we discussed the fact how gaming or online betting is actually a state subject, and that is why a few states have allowed it while many of the states have actually banned betting, etc. For example, you can find casinos in Sikkim, you can find casinos in Goa, but in most other states you will not find establishments such as casinos. At the center level, the parliament has passed multiple laws which have provisions related to lottery, gambling and betting in India. Let us discuss some of those in detail. The Lottery Regulation Act of 1998 says that lottery is legal in India, but it should be organized by the state government. Meaning that in a particular state, the state government can ban lottery if they want, but overall across the country, it is not banned. The IPC 1960 has provisions for punishing anyone who does any obscene act in a public place. So even while gaming, if there are any obscene acts that are performed, that will be punished under the IPC. The Prize Competition Act of 1955 defines what exactly will be a prize in the competition, what is allowed to be given as a prize and what is not. Then we also have the FEMA, that is Foreign Exchange Management Act of 1999, the IT rules of 2011, and the Income Tax Act of 1961. All of these have been passed to regulate how gambling can take place and what will happen to the money that is won from gambling or lottery. Now, the question of online gaming, etc., has not just been a part of high court cases. In fact, a few months back, this question was also part of discussion in the Rajya Sabha, where multiple members expressed their views about how online gaming should be regulated. That is why it has become an important topic specifically for this year. Now, the online gaming industry is expected to generate revenue of over 29,000 crores by 2025 and would involve over 65 crore users. It is estimated that it will provide over 15,000 jobs to the people in this sector. Even the GST Council right now is discussing the issue of online gaming and is trying to fix the GST slab that will be imposed on online games. It has many big names in this sector, including Dream 11, which is one of the biggest companies in this sector and has attracted a lot of global investment as well. The suggestions in this sector is, if the government really wants to regulate and earn revenue from this, the government should ensure that the KYC norms are followed. Each game should follow a proper age rating, and minors should only be allowed to proceed after their parents have consented. Proper OTP verification or Aadhaar linking could also resolve this issue, and there should not be any in-game purchases allowed. In-game purchase means when you start playing a game, you might get an option that if you want more power or more lives, you can pay money and the game would continue. These kind of in-game purchases should not be allowed because that is what leads to misuse of the money. Also, the in-game chat option should be disabled because in-game chat option leads to harassment of a lot of people who are playing games, and that is what leads to a lot of mental problems. The government should also have a gaming authority at the center government level, while various forms of self-regulations can be encouraged within the industry. The authority could be made responsible for making regulations for online gaming industry, monitoring their operations, preventing societal issues, etc. So rather than having a blanket ban, it is always advisable to go for proper regulations in this industry. The next article again takes us back to Russia, but now with respect to what is happening between Russia and China and how their relationship has flourished over the past decade or so. Now, Russia and China historically have been on the same page with respect to their political ideology of communism. But there was a period from 1960s to the 1980s and 90s where the two sides were not the best of friends for various reasons. China did not want to see Russia as their big brother. Russia, on the other hand, was always trying to impose itself as the biggest communist ideology around the world. And that is why the two sides did not really go together for 2 or 3 decades. But those issues now seem to have been resolved, and the two sides are now closer than ever. In fact, so much so that many people are blaming that it is only because of China's constant support that Russia now feels so confident that it can now even invade Ukraine despite the fear of sanctions from the West. China, on the other hand, has not spoken openly about the issue. They are trying to maintain a balance. They are saying continuously that Russia's security concerns are valid, but they are not saying whether or not we support the Ukraine's invasion or not. The growing closeness between the two countries can be understood if we see what has been happening in the past decade or so. Last year, Russia's foreign minister said that the relationship between Russia and China is the best in their entire history. The two leaders, in fact, have met each other 38 times in the past 9 years. As I told you earlier, the history between the two sides goes a long way back. When the Communist Party of China was newly formed, they viewed the Soviet Union as their ideological leader, and they needed financial and technical support from Soviet Union, and they got a lot of it. But the split took place when China grew stronger and started considering themselves as having a different form of ideology, and when there were some border issues that came up. But by 1980s, 1990s, when the collapse of the Soviet Union took place, the equation changed. It is now an unsaid understanding that China is the bigger power between the two. The biggest factor between the two coming closer is their common discomfort with the US and the Western allies that is bringing the two countries closer than ever before. China repeatedly has said that they understand Russia's concerns of security, and Russia is correct in expecting NATO not to expand towards the Russian borders. And that is why China is continuing giving all the economic and trade support that Russia requires right now, despite facing sanctions from the West. Russia has also returned the favor. Russia has supported the One China principle time and time again and has said that Taiwan is not an independent country and is a part of China only. The defense deals between the two nations have also kicked up a lot in the past few years. In 2014, China became the first foreign buyer of the S-400 missile defense system, for which India is still awaiting the delivery. The commercial ties have also grown between the two sides. In fact, the bilateral trade last year reached $147 billion, while India-Russia trade has not even reached $20 billion. So we are pretty far behind when it comes to bilateral ties between the two sides. China, on the other hand, is importing a lot of oil and gas from Russia. So much so that Russia is China's largest source of energy imports and the second largest source of crude oil, which is giving a lot of comfort to Russia because they know that even if Western countries impose sanctions, their market for oil and gas will not be closed down because China will continuously buy from them. Now, the interesting part here is because China has so deep trade ties with almost every country in the region, the reality is that China would also not want a lot of instability in the region that would come from the Ukraine-Russia crisis. In fact, the Chinese foreign minister said that the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all the countries should be respected and safeguarded. Although they never said that Ukraine's territorial integrity should be safeguarded, but they implied that they want every country to feel safe. The interesting part is it does not apply to China when they start making their moves against India or other smaller island nations. While China said that the current situation should have a diplomatic solution and we should return to the Minsk agreement that was signed in 2014 and 15, Vladimir Putin did not really appreciate that message and just 2 days later ordered the troops to enter the two rebel controlled areas, which we just discussed, and called that these are the peacemakers and not Russian military. Thus, it also shows that despite all the closeness between China and Russia, China does not have so much influence on Russia that they can stop the Russian president from taking whatever steps that he wants to take. As far as India is concerned, it has a lot of implications on India as well. Russia will most probably come under heavy sanctions from the West, and the sanctions have already started from the US at least. This will bring Russia and China even closer to each other and increase Russia's dependence on Chinese economy and Chinese trade, which does not really augur well for India. India has to expect this closeness now in the coming years and will have to see how Russia reacts to India's membership of the Quad, because at the end of the day, India is allied with the US at many other platforms which the Russian government would not really appreciate. Now, a couple of important things here. The first, the Minsk agreement that is mentioned here. The Minsk agreement actually came into being after Russia annexed the Crimea region of Ukraine in 2014. After the fighting was going on between Ukraine and those separatist groups which were supported by the Russian military, these two agreements were signed in 2014 and 2015. In 2014, Ukraine and the Russian-backed separatists. Separatist means those people within Ukraine who wanted to separate and have a new country. They signed a 12-point ceasefire deal which talked about exchanging prisoners from each other, delivering humanitarian aid, withdrawing heavy weapons, etc. However, this did not really go on, and within a few months, both the sides violated this agreement and the agreement broke down very quickly. Thus, a second agreement was signed the next year in 2015. Now it had more members, that is from Russia, Ukraine, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which had representation from France, Germany, etc. And they signed a 13-point agreement. The agreement was very similar to the last one, that is about ceasefire and not taking the conflict forward, and also ensuring that a peaceful solution is found about the existing issues. Out of the 13 points, the point number 10 was there will be withdrawal of all the foreign armed formations and military equipment from the two disputed regions, that is Donetsk and Luhansk. And guess what? These are the two regions where the Russian military has just entered. So obviously the second agreement has also now gone down. If you come to the last slide, see these are the two regions again where the Russian military has entered, which Vladimir Putin is calling as peacemakers. So even the Minsk II agreement which China wanted to be followed has been violated by the Russian troops now. Now, with respect to India, One of the reasons why India cannot take a strong line against Russia or Russian action is, if you look at India's military, we are still very heavily dependent on the Russian military supplies. There was a report that came out in 2021 called the Military Balance Report that talks about how many equipments that India is still using which are Russian made or Russian designed. In fact, if you look at India's army, air force, navy, all our arms of the military are highly dependent on Russia's exports. This report said that India has been the largest Russian arm importer, accounting for 1/3 of all the Russian arms exports. In fact, somewhere about 62% of all India's arms exports are still Russian. And there were many reasons for this. While US only gave India non-lethal defense technology, such as the Super Hercules aircraft, the C-13 Globemaster, etc., Russia provided high-end technology to India, including the BrahMos supersonic missile, S-400, etc., which tilted India more towards Russia. The army-to-army cooperation also has been extremely powerful with India and Russia coming together. There are over 10,000 pieces of military hardware which are procured from Russia. Indian Army's main battle tank is composed on Russian technology. India, in fact, is also negotiating the price of AK-103 rifles to be made in India with Russian technology. Indian Navy's only operating aircraft carrier right now is a refurbished Soviet Union ship that we have renamed as INS Vikramaditya. Not just this, the Indian Air Force's 667 plane fleet is also 71% of Russian origin, including the Sukhois, the MiGs, etc. Although we have started buying from other countries such as France, etc., but it will take a long time to tilt the balance in favor of the other countries because we have bought a lot of military equipment from Russia over the past decades. The next article that we have talks about the interesting relationship between LIC and the IDBI Bank and how it is now becoming an issue when LIC is going for its IPO. Now, when any company has to go for an IPO, that is, when any company has to list its shares in the market, they have to submit a document to SEBI, which is called DRHP, that is the Draft Red Herring Prospectus. In short, this document contains all the details about the company's operations, its past, what are the challenges that the company is facing, what are the profits that it has made in the past few years, etc. So that the investors can read the document and then decide whether or not they have to invest in the company. Now, the article here says that as per this document, which the LIC has given to SEBI, LIC has listed that the risk factors that they have in their business also includes the IDBI Bank. Now, if you go back to 2019, you would remember that LIC acquired over 51% ownership of the IDBI Bank when the bank was about to go bankrupt. Right now, LIC owns 49.24% of the IDBI Bank. Since then, LIC has infused a lot of money into the IDBI Bank to make its operations run in a better way. LIC infused over 4,700 crore rupees in October 2019 to ensure that the bank's operations are run properly. The IDBI Bank then raised some money from outside investors as well. Right now, LIC has reduced its stake in the bank to 49.24%. So it is not a majority owner in the bank. That is why LIC says that IDBI is an associate business. So the logic is that if a company owns 50% or more share of another company, then it will become a subsidiary. So if over 50% of IDBI was owned by LIC, then IDBI would have been a subsidiary of LIC. But because they now own less than 50%, IDBI is an associate business. Associate business is when the parent company owns less than 50% stakes. So 49.24% is owned by LIC in IDBI Bank. About 45.5% is owned by the government of India and the rest by outside investors who have given money to the bank recently. Now the question is, why is it that IDBI is seen as a risk factor by LIC? The LIC says that IDBI does not need any more funds now, but in the future, if they require more funds, then LIC would have to give the bank more funds because we cannot let the bank die. So in the future, LIC might need to divert more funds into the bank, and that is why it is a risk factor for the LIC. Not just this, there are two other interesting factors here. So when LIC was buying 51% of IDBI in 2019, RBI had said that because both these companies give home loans, one of them will have to shut down their home loan operation. See, IDBI is a bank So they will give home loans. LIC also gives home loans in the form of LIC Housing Finance. So RBI had said that one of you would have to close it down within 5 years. But that has not happened. Both of them are still giving home loans, so that is a concern. RBI had said that because both of these are same entities, you can't compete with each other. So one of you have to close down the home loan. So the article here says if LIC closes down this home loan section, that means that their profit might reduce in the coming years. The other problem is that there's a SEBI regulation which says that any shareholder having 10% or more shares or voting rights in an asset management company cannot have 10% shares in some other asset management company also. So the problem here is both LIC and IDBI, both of them actually offer mutual funds. Mutual funds are offered by both the companies, LIC also, IDBI also. SEBI says that we will not allow this. If LIC offers mutual fund and they own more than 10% of another company that offers mutual fund, then it will not be allowed. So either LIC or IDBI stop their mutual fund operations. That is one option. The other option is LIC would have to reduce the ownership of IDBI Bank to less than 10%, because we cannot have a situation where two companies have a single owner of more than 10% and both companies are offering mutual funds. That will not be allowed. That is regulation number 7B of SEBI's mutual fund regulations. So if LIC has to continue, LIC would have to reduce its ownership of IDBI Bank by less than 10%. Now, what has happened is recently the government also said that now that IDBI Bank is running properly, it is earning a lot of profit. Last year, it earned 578 crores of profit. Now we are ready to sell it in the market. So most probably in the coming months, you will see that LIC will reduce its ownership in the IDBI Bank to less than 10% so that they can satisfy the rule that SEBI has. But these two things LIC still has to do in the coming months. Number one, sort out which of these two will give home loans. And second, sort out how it will reduce the ownership in the IDBI Bank to less than 10% so that both of them can offer mutual funds and they are not violating the SEBI regulations. Now, just a refresher about the IDBI LIC deal. The IDBI Bank stands for Industrial Development Bank of India. It came up in 1964 as a statutory body under the Act of the Parliament. It was supposed to be like a development bank such as NABARD, the National Housing Bank, SIDBI, etc. But in 1976, the ownership was transferred to the Government of India, and in 2004, it became a fully commercial bank when the RBI incorporated IDBI as a scheduled bank. So since 2004, it is working as a proper scheduled bank like any other banks under the government. Now, it was in 2018 that the condition of the bank started to deteriorate because of a lot of bad loans. The total NPAs at the end of March 2018 were 28%. So over one quarter of the loans that they had given were turning bad. In 2018, the cabinet approved that okay, LIC will take over the bank and infuse more money so that the bank can work properly. So in Jan 2019, LIC completed the acquisition of 51% stake in the IDBI Bank, which marked the entry of LIC into the banking sector in India. And that is how we have reached the present situation. Also, the article, as I said, makes a mention of the draft red herring prospectus. As I said in the beginning of the explanation, this is a document that the company has to submit to SEBI when they are offering IPO in the market. Any company wanting to raise funds from the public would have to disclose all this information. That is why there have been a lot of cheers when LIC said that they will be introducing an IPO, because for the first time now, people in India would get to see the actual numbers and working details of the LIC. The document should contain record of company's operations, directors, past record, key details such as issue price, etc. These were the articles we wanted to discuss on the Hindu newspaper today. A couple of practice questions. Number one, is growing proximity between Russia and China a cause of concern for India? Evaluate how the Indian government can navigate through the challenges emerging from this relation. Second, with the emergence of multiple online gaming platforms, it is time for the government to relook into the existing policy and make favorable changes to help this sector grow. Comment. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.